Hello, this is Deacon Chris. I would like to share my homily for this upcoming Sunday, February 5th, 2023. It is the fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time. I'm mostly going to be reflecting on Matthew chapter 5, 13 through 16. You'll see the references that we are the light of the world. And also there's a passage I'll refer to from 2 Corinthians. I call this homily Becoming Real. In the middle of my career, I read a book by Parker Palmer, The Courage to Teach, that changed not just my teaching, but my life. It's a wonderful book, full of warmth and insight. And when I was on a committee that invited speakers to come to OSU, I was able to invite Palmer to come. I was a little nervous as I was making arrangements because he asked for a king-size bed and to have a few hours alone before his talk. So I was sort of wondering if I'd be dealing with another academic prima donna. But he was a wonderful man. He needed a king-size bed because he was 6'6", a lot taller than I imagined from reading him. And he wanted the time alone so he could meditate before the talk and get centered. And that talk was very, very good. But it wasn't just his words or his wisdom that attracted me, but a kind of light that shone out of him. You are the light of the world, Jesus tells us, and we must let that light shine before others. And that's what I experienced with Palmer. He's a Christian man from a Quaker background, but he didn't talk about that. There was just something about him that you wanted to be around, a decency and a kindness, or maybe the word is authenticity. I saw that in the workshop he did for faculty before the big talk, even as some of the faculty resisted him and his methods. And I experienced that when everything was over, and I invited him out to the beanery, the old beanery, for coffee. He stretched out his long legs and he took a sip of his coffee and he said, "Tell me about yourself." And he really meant it. We talked and he listened, and in his listening, he brought out the best in me. We've all known people like this. We've all had them in our lives. People who seem to have a certain kind of energy or warmth. They are the ones who influence us, who change us. We are the light of the world, and that light is in us, and that light is Christ. And when we act out of our best selves, people glimpse God through us. I knew a woman who was dying, a woman who had had an important job in Seattle and was admired by many people, especially younger people. And a lot of them made pilgrimages to Corvallis to see her one last time and to tell her how much she meant to them. She must have been just a really remarkable leader and mentor and teacher. But she was a cranky person too, and an impatient one, the kind of person I can really identify with. And she told me that she was tired of having to play the wise and kind old woman all the time and just wanted to be left alone to die in peace. She didn't want to have to make people feel better by having a good death. She didn't want to have to keep showing people how strong she was. And this is why I admired her. Because she wasn't perfect and didn't pretend to be. Because in her honesty, there was a humility. As Parker Palmer was humble too in his own way, despite all of his fame and his reputation. When I came to you, brothers and sisters, proclaiming the mystery of God, St. Paul says, I did not come with sublimity of words or of wisdom. I came, he says, in weakness and fear and much trembling. And finally, that's exactly the point. It wasn't his own wisdom he was proclaiming. It was the wisdom of God. And maybe that's part of what makes certain people compelling to us, that they're not looking at themselves, but outward. And they help us to look outward too. They are not what is being filmed, they are the camera. In admitting their flaws and limitations, they give us the courage to admit our own, and then the confidence to keep doing what we can do, and to do it in our own way. In our own way. I can't be Parker Palmer. I'm only 5'7.5" for one thing, and I'm never going to be any taller. As Thomas Merton puts it in New Seeds of Contemplation, this is a wonderful paragraph. It is not humility to insist on being someone you are not. It is as much as saying that you know better than God who you are and who you ought to be. How do you expect to reach your own perfection by leading somebody else's life? Their sanctity will never be yours. You must have the humility to work out your own salvation. It takes heroic humility to be yourself and to be nobody but the person God intended you to be. It's a remarkable paragraph. I keep coming back to it again and again. God made us who we are, with all of our quirks and likes and histories, and this is who he calls us right now. As he calls the disciples, as they're mending their nets, he walks by and he calls them. He doesn't say, come and follow me when you get your act together. He says, now. I think of so many students I had over the years who felt that they had to sound like they were going to go in college when they were writing their papers, using big words when smaller ones would do, trying to fake a wisdom and a knowledge they didn't have, when really, if they just let themselves write, if they just said what they really had to say, if they were honest and direct, their writing was far more powerful and insightful than the usual sort of academic talk. Teaching them to write was unteaching them. It was saying, knock off this other stuff, which was really saying, trust yourself. You can only be as tall as you are. And I think that's finally what most attracts us to certain people, their fidelity to themselves. And in their fidelity, their humility before God. And in their humility, their confidence in God's power to work through them. This is what in the Courage to Teach, Parker Palmer calls integrity. This is Palmer. Integrity requires that I discern what is integral to my selfhood, what fits and what does not, and that I choose life-giving ways of relating to the forces that converge within me. Do I welcome them or fear them? Embrace them or reject them? Move with them or against them? By choosing integrity, I become more whole. But wholeness does not mean perfection. It means becoming more real. That's the Palmer quote. Of course we have to admit our sins and do all we can to overcome them through grace. Again and again, day after day. We can't overlook our sinfulness. We can't pretend that our sins are not there. We can't pretend we're saints. The saints never do. But our sins do not define us. Our sins are not who we really are. And we have to know this and believe this. Our sins are not our deepest layer. They are not at the core. To let our light shine, we have to be comfortable in our own skin. To let our light shine, we have to be comfortable in our own skin. And this is what I pray for you and for me, that we discern what fits us and what doesn't, that we find what is life-giving, that we welcome the forces inside us, not the sinful ones, but the deeper ones, that we become more real. Because when we do, that's Christ moving in us, expressing himself through us, through our true self, our real self. May we all become more real.